Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the Paint-A-Thon from Amy Howard at Home. Today I've been given the honor and the privilege of showing you a new product that has just come out from Amy Howard. It is the lovely and amazing embossing gel. You're gonna love this. It's one of the best products that I've seen recently. So this embossing gel is gonna give you a little bit of relief. It's gonna give you a little bit of structure. It's gonna give you some peaks. It's going to give you a little texture. It's going to give you a lot of things that will help you achieve an old world feel on a newer piece of furniture. Say you went thrifting and found a new piece of furniture, something with clean lines, flat surfaces, but you wanted to have a little bit more old world capacity. Look no further. I'm going to show you today how you can use the embossing gel on a piece to try to make it feel a little bit more old, maybe a little bit more grungy. So before we start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I am Stacey Perry. I am from Nixon, Missouri. You can usually find me on my Facebook page at Life Beautiful Design. Feel free to join me. Today I'm just going to walk you through the steps on how to turn this wonderful embossing gel into a work of art on your furniture. So hang out with me, enjoy, and I hope you learn a little bit something. So bear with me for just a moment. I'm going to turn my camera so that I can show you these wonderful products we have sitting on the table here and our inspiration color chart. And then we'll start the demo. Thank you. So we're going to use two types of milk paint, one in Noir and one in Praying Wife. Then we're going to use Dust of Ages for finishing, antiquing glaze, embossing gel, of course. Then we're going to use the light antique wax, a dark antique wax, and then our lovely open stencil. You want to use an open stencil and not a mesh stencil. We'll go into that more here later. So I'm going to take my stencil and I'm going to lay it on the drawer front once I get it positioned correctly. I did pre-coat this drawer with a Good Man Is Hard to Find. Since we're using milk paint, I wanted it to have a good substrate to attach to so that it would adhere properly, and using one-step paint does that. So I'm going to use our blue painter's tape and I'm going to secure this stencil to the drawer so it doesn't smudge when I apply our embossing gel. Now I'm going to grab our embossing gel with a spatula. The spatula can be used, a credit card, a squeegee, a scraper, anything that you could use to apply this would be fine. I'm going to take my spatula and then I'm going to hold the stencil while I apply this. The tighter you hold the stencil to the bottom of the drawer or to the material that you're adding it to, it will prevent any leaks in the stencil. I like to work with the embossing material from the inside to the outside. And you'll see right now I'm just trying to make sure that all the gaps are filled in the stencil itself. So if you take your squeegee or your spreader at almost a parallel line to the surface, you'll be able to remove excess without gouging into your embossing medium. So now we have all of this removed that we need to remove, and we're going to remove the stencil. And you have a beautiful design left over. So now comes the fun part. So now we're going to take this awesome gel and we're going to apply the heat gun. When I apply the heat gun, it's going to literally cause this to swell. So here we go. We're going to zoom in a little bit for you. And as you see, look at that. As you heat it, it puffs up. Now you do want to do this when the embossing gel is wet. You don't want it to dry out before you do this. But look what happens when I use my heat gun. And it'll just keep getting puffier and puffier as we go here. So just watch really closely. You'll see the nice puffiness. And this will cause us to have a little bit of a raised relief that we can paint with different colors and cause some texture in our piece. So here we go. We're still getting some height to this, so don't be alarmed. What will happen as this cools, you will have some deflation of that, and that's okay. Mainly, we just want to give it a little bit more height than it would be if we just left the embossing medium alone. So I'm going to put my second one on, the other part of where my hardware enters the drawer. So we're going to apply the stencil once again like we did the previous time. I try not to stick the tape down very hard to the embossed side. I use my palette knife one more time. Try to hold this one down a little bit tighter, and then I'm going to apply the embossing gel to the stencil like we did previously. So we're just going to keep working around the sides here, holding it as firmly as possible. Try not to get my fingers in the middle of it. So you'll notice that on this one, I've gotten a little bit inside the hardware area, but that's okay. That'll be easy to get out once we're ready to reapply the hardware. Once I get this all smoothed out and I replace my lid on my embossing gel, I'm actually going to remove the blue painter's tape, and we're going to gently lift up the stencil to keep the embossing gel in the correct place and not smear it. Now, once again, for the magic of the heat gun, we're going to use the heat gun once again in close up to really puff this up so you can see what happens as it goes. Isn't that just fun and amazing? That's the best part, just watching that fill up with air and puff up. And once again, though, as you see on the medallion on the left, it will deflate a little bit after it cools, and that's fine. It'll still give you a nice raised texture. So I'm going to sit here for a second and check to see if there's any heat. Here's my two milk paints. We have the Praying Wife on the right and the Noir on the left. These were made previously and strained. So we're going to start with the Praying Wife as our base color. This is what I did on the rest of the body of the end table. So once I get a little bit of this in my brush, get it saturated, I'm going to really make sure that I get it applied to the medallions, in the medallions and in between them, and really try to get all the grooves and the nooks and the crannies during this painting. I'm also going to go ahead and paint the rest of the drawer while I'm at it so that we can see the finished results. So we're just going to keep adding this lovely, lovely ochre color. It's just so pretty. This is probably one of my favorite colors of milk paint. I love that ochre, or some people would call it more maybe a marigold, or it's just so pretty. It's a pretty, pretty color. So I'm just going to spread it across, make sure it's nice and even. As you'll see on the right, there are a little bit of bubbles. Once I use my heat gun to dry it, those will pop and it'll flatten out so you won't notice them or see them. I did straighten it earlier, so there shouldn't be any sediment left. Make sure we get the sides of the drawers here. And as soon as we get all the little pieces covered, we're going to use our heat gun and we're going to dry it. So here we go. Here's our heat gun. Love my heat gun here. One thing about milk paint is if you are using a heat gun to dry it, you want to make sure that the base coat isn't too thick. If you have a thick base coat or a thick coat in general and you dry it with a heat gun, it dries too fast. It's going to crack and not stay adhered to your surface. So I would recommend thin coats of the milk paint. If you have to do more than one, you can. But thinner coats are better. The milk paint is this dark, deep, dark color as you apply it. But watch as I use the heat gun here. And it's going to turn this creamy, lighter color. And this happens with all the colors of milk paints. It's more vibrant wet, but then it becomes more muted and more subtle when it's dry. And, you know, if you look at an old war piece, most colors are muted. It's going to be a little bit more of a muted color palette. So this just ties in with that. So as it dries more and more, you'll see it all turn into that kind of buttery yellow color. I'm going to dry this really, really, really well because I'm going to add a second color to the top of this. I do want to make sure that I don't keep my heat gun in one area for too long. Even though I don't have it up super high, I still don't want to burn or cause a burn on any of my my colors. So it's almost dry. We're getting all these little nooks and crannies dry. That's looking pretty good. Gonna finish out the corners. A little more heat gun. Still fairly dry to the touch. It's pretty warm at the moment. Probably need to let it cool for just a moment after this heat gun is done here now. So we're going to start with the Noir. Should be cool enough. The beauty of using milk paint is that you can utilize it in times when you have high humidity. Milk paint can be dried with a dryer, hair dryer. It can be dried with a heat gun. So in areas of high humidity, when you can't use a acrylic paint or maybe even a milk, sorry, not milk, but even a chalk-based paint, you could possibly use a milk paint instead. And just think, you can continue creating and you won't have to wait 24 to 48 hours to recoat your piece. So here's our Noir that we're applying here. And you can see that I'm making sure it's getting in all the little nooks and crannies. I seem to apply it a little bit too much to that left side. So we're going to make sure we apply it all the way across the piece. Got a little brush hair in here. Got to get rid of that. And then we'll reapply some paint. You'll never see it. There we go. So now we got that done. And we're going to get the edges of our door. Make sure we get every piece. All the edges. You want a finished piece. You don't want it to look unfinished by any means. You want to make sure when you apply the milk paint that you don't scrub too hard because you don't want to remove that underlying layer. You want to get a nice upper layer. So now I'm going to go back to my heat gun. And you can notice that it's going to start drying here. It's going to start turning almost a white gray color. So the Noir milk paint is a black milk paint. But look what happens. It turns into this light, almost white pale gray color. It's so pretty. And as it goes, you'll notice it getting lighter and lighter. One thing to note, though, is when you add wax to this, whether it's light wax or dark antique wax, it will darken up a little bit. So it won't be that bright white color. So we're just going to continue drying till we get it nice and dry. And you can see that color coming out. Now this is going to take just a little bit longer to dry because there are other layers of paint underneath this. And so, you know, it's a little bit more substance to dry down through. So here we go. Oh, you can see it starting to dry now for sure. See that white showing up right there? It's actually more of a gray tone, but on the video it's starting to show more like a white tone. But that's okay. We'll show you the finished project here in a minute. So as we continue to use our lovely heat gun, it'll get more and more dry. You can really see where that embossed area is so defined in there. You can see how it's getting more and more defined as this paint dries. Doesn't that just look awesome? Just think of all the textures that you can achieve by adding these lovely areas of raised embossed gel. You know, even if it's not a medallion or a rosette like I'm using here, maybe you want to do like a long, beautiful chain of something, or you want to use any type of open stencil. You can use that, and that would be just amazing. Think of all the different designs and patterns that you can produce. One thing about the stencils that I didn't mention earlier is that the stencils do need to be an open stencil. Do not use a mesh stencil during this process because the mesh stencil will not allow for the raised embossing that you're seeing that we got here on this piece. So it looks like I'm just about dry. It's drying, drying, drying. Some areas you'll notice that the pigments in the Noir have caused it to be a little bit darker than others. That's normal. There's just some pigments in the paint itself that can vary by concentration. And so looking at the medallions themselves, you can notice that there's more concentrated black in the grooves of what we performed earlier. So that will remain a little bit darker than the other material. But we're just going to keep drying here for just a few minutes. Dry, dry, dry. Okay, we're getting some good drying. Feels fairly dry. We're going to add some antiquing glaze to this, so it's going to become wet again. I'm going to use this sea sponge that you see, which was pre-wet with some water, and then I'm going to use the antiquing glaze that I showed earlier in the video to try to bring out the ochre color from underneath the Noir. I did get a little spot here, so I'm going to try to dry it just a little bit. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be worth trying to get it dried all the way. Nothing like sitting here and watching paint dry. So I'm just going to leave it. Hopefully it's a happy little mistake and we can incorporate it in with the rest of our stuff. So here's the antiquing glaze. The antiquing glaze I poured into a small little cup. You'll want to saturate your sponge completely, but you want to make sure that it's squeezed out and that it doesn't drip. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm just using a stippling motion or just a light patting motion to remove layers of this paint. So as we go, you'll notice you'll see more and more of the ochre color. There, it's coming through. It just takes a minute or so. So as we remove, you'll see some ochre coming through. See how yucky this is getting? It gets built up with the milk paint, the top color. So you'll want to rinse it out with water and then also go back and re-dip it into your antiquing glaze, squeeze it out really well, and then go back and stipple or blot. And so you'll just continue this process over and over until you get the look that you're wanting with the milk paint. So as you see here, oh, see all that lovely ochre coming through? That praying wife, oh, so pretty. So now I'm just going to do a little bit of this in that area that you saw earlier that I got a little drip on. So when you think about distressing things, you'll notice that when you distress something, or you'll notice on old furniture especially, that things are distressed in the areas of use. So look at this way. If you're going to use a drawer, where would the biggest area of use be? It would be on the sides, it would be on the top, and it would be on the bottom of the drawer. So I'm just going to use my sponge here, and I'm going to distress this on the little edges so that we have a more realistic looking drawer, a very old world, and it'll look very beautiful and grungy at the same time. So now I've got this antiqued. I'm going to take my heat gun and I'm going to dry this area so that I can show you the final steps, which would be to apply waxes and the dust of ages to help really make this lovely embossed area pop. So here we are drying it. As it dries, you'll see the colors change. It'll go once again from that dark color into a light gray and a yellow. And it's going, gone. Really pretty. Okay. So it looks like the bottom areas are going to stay kind of darker because it's a thicker area of the paint. So they're not going to dry out anymore. So we're just going to leave them like it is. Now I'm going to take some light antiquing wax and barely kiss the surface and just cover the area. Make sure it goes to a tack. And now it's time where I can add my dark antiquing wax after I offload my brush. And this dark antiquing wax is quite a bit darker, so I'm just going to add it to maybe the topped raised areas of the medallions. I'm going to add it to the edges of the drawers where it might get dirty when your hands touch it. I'm going to add a little bit to the outside of the drawers, the edges, because that is where your hands are going to touch the drawer. Just kind of make it a little bit used and old world. So you want to use the dark wax sparingly. You don't want it to stay too tacky because it will not dry very well if you use too much. So now I'm actually going to use the Dust of Ages. So here I'm going to put a bunch on my brush and I'm just going to paint it on. So we're just going to apply, I'm going to add a little bit more. You can never have too much. So we're going to add a little bit more to this piece. I'm going to brush it off and blow it off. You can usually just take your brush and remove it, but I'm just kind of blowing some of this off here just so you can see it. So now I'm going to take a lint-free rag, and oops, it's a little wet, but I'm going to find the dry area with my lint-free rag, and then I'm going to buff this. So when you buff the wax and the Dust of Ages, it gets that dust down in the crevices, makes it look old. It also allows your wax to be activated, so that gives you a nice, smooth, soft finish. One tip is that if you're gonna add wax, think of the areas, once again, that are the used areas, the areas where you want a lot of wear. So on the edges, maybe on the medallions, you want to really buff this area to make them shiny. And there we go. Hi guys, I'm back. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what it looks like with the drawer inside the end table. I hope you learned some good tips and tricks, and I hope you feel confident enough that you can use the embossing material on your next project. Okay, let me flip it around so you can see what it looks like. Okay guys, so here's the finished drawer. There's our table and a door with the embossed areas, so you can see the texture on here. Let me get a little bit closer. Isn't that just yummy? Can't beat some good texture. Fantastic. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video on the embossing gel, and I hope you'll use it. It's an amazing product. I think you'll like it once you start to use it on your projects. Make sure you join the before and after group for Amy Howard Home, and you'll see the before and after pictures of the tables that I finished. So I hope to see you soon. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.